Mika, it's recording time. Why aren't you ready?
Hang on, just getting my notes.
No, dude, you're already running late.
I'm sorry, the cat was on my lap. And you know it's illegal to move the cat.
Screw the cat. Do you care more about the cat than my time?
But you should see the face she makes when I kick her off my lap.
Well, then just bring her with you next time. I want to talk to this cat because you use this cat as an excuse a lot. I think we need to work on this excuses thing.
The dog ate my homework.
Oh, now you've got a dog. More excuses. But
Yeah.
hopefully the book we're talking about today will help.
Yeah, maybe. I got some things to say about it.
Okay. Welcome to Thriving Between the Lines, the podcast that examines personal development books through the lens of intersectionality, making self-help content more accessible and relatable. I'm life coach and pesky black intellectual, leslievcoaching Garcia.
And I'm Mika, the lovable human catastrophe.
And together, we're not just reading between the lines, we're thriving between the lines. All right, we're coming to you today from Mianjin, or Brisbane, the lands of the Yagara and Turrbal people, and we pay respect to elders past and present. And speaking of respect, Mika, you couldn't even respect my time by being here on time.
I'm sorry. I do feel bad about running late all the time. It is quite an issue with us ADHD folk.
Yeah?
But I don't like to make excuses. I am working on it, trying to come up with methods of not being late.
This is one reason that I think the book we're talking about today is the perfect book to start with for this podcast. Tell us, Mika, what book are we talking about for this episode?
No Excuses, The Power of Self-Discipline by Brian Tracy.
All right. So we've both read this book now.
Yes.
And you agree this is a perfect book to start with?
Yes.
In our preface episode, we talked about the problems that we see within the personal development industry, within personal development writing, and the things that we want to see change. This book, I think, exemplifies so much of what we discussed as being wrong with personal development writing. But there's also information in this book that's really useful.
Yeah, I can totally agree.
Yeah.
There's some points. The point itself, yeah, it will work, and it is good advice. Just delivered in the wrong way.
Anyone who has read this book and thought, I'm just not good enough. I can't do these things. Like this book makes me feel like a failure. We're here to remind you that no, you're not a failure. Just because you can't follow a personal development book down to the letter and gain ultimate success.
Yeah. A lot of the stuff he goes over is absolutely the things that I've worked on in psychology and with my psychologist to actually make my life better. And they do work. But the way it's delivered there does not speak to me. In fact, makes me feel very alienated. And if I had just read that before having done this other work, I would have been very turned off and probably felt more defeated.
And that's the issue, isn't it? Some of the things that we talked about in our preface that can make people feel defeated and defeat the purpose of actually empowering people in personal development books are things like writing in absolutes.
Yep.
Erasure of the lived experiences of people who don't experience the world through the specific lens of the writer, and that unwavering conviction that comes with that.
Yeah. Because don't everyone experience the world just like me? What? I'm the only person in the world.
And we talked about personal development books that are written in the style of like, just do what I did and you will achieve the same level of success. He says that in so many different ways throughout this book. And we'll get into the details in a minute. Hopefully through this discussion, we can pull out the useful bits of the information, but also call out some of the things that are very damaging about the way this book is written.
Yes, I think that's the important thing to bring out of it is it's not the content itself. In most cases, it's the delivery.
Yeah. In some cases, the content can be the problem.
Yeah, I have a few things to say at certain points.
Yeah. There are some things that I think are really, really helpful and even in the way they're stated, but then they get undercut by this other stuff that I'm like, what is this? What?
Yeah, I very much agree.
All right. So, shall we dive in?
Let's do it.
Okay. All right, Mika, what do you know about Brian Tracy?
Basically just what he wrote in the book,
Okay.
which wasn't a lot.
Of his humble beginnings?
Yeah.
Yeah.
One sentence, two sentences.
He makes a lot of reference to his humble beginnings in different ways. But anyway, the overall picture of Brian Tracy, he's massive in the sales and success world. He's not necessarily the first name that people think of nowadays when they think of personal development, but he has been tremendously influential for quite a long time. He has written a lot of different books. I think according to his website, something like 85 books. But every
Wow.
source I look at has a different number of books translated into like dozens of different languages. So yeah, he's been going for quite a long time.
So, Daddy Capitalism. Yes, Daddy, bring that money.
Yes, I believe that is the subtitle of his autobiography. No, one of his most famous books was Eat That Frog, and
Oh, yes, I know. I've definitely heard of it.
yeah, I think that's one that a lot of people have heard of, and it's based on the Mark Twain quote. Are you aware of the Mark Twain quote?
I believe so.
Okay, I can read it to you.
Yeah.
So the Mark Twain quote is, "If it's your job to eat a frog, it's best to do it first thing in the morning. And if it's your job to eat 2 frogs, it's best to eat the biggest one first." So it's basically a statement on like prioritizing, putting the most crucial tasks first, and then everything else is just not nearly as challenging. They even made reference to the book in Orange is the New Black.
Whoa, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So imagine these prison inmates talking about like how inspired they were by this eat the frog concept.
There is not one person in that show that I think this book is right for.
Really?
Not in its raw form. But
Well, if you had to reread this book in the voice of one of the characters in Orange is the New Black,
yeah,
who would it be?
probably, what's her name? Crazy Eyes.
Suzanne.
Suzanne.
Yeah.
I think it would be Suzanne because she could bring the fun and the empathy
Okay.
to the book, I reckon.
I would love to read it in the voice of Pennsatucky,
Oh, yeah.
but
Yeah.
I think the more appropriate character for this book would be like Healy. You know, he kind of had he had an idea of how people should be and how people should behave, and he was pretty stuck to that.
Oh, right. Yes. Healy would be correct. Yes. I was thinking which character could translate this book the best to make it actually apply to all those different type of women. I was thinking Red.
Oh.
Yeah, like she could read this. She was so intelligent. She would be able to like work this out and how to reframe it to apply to them.
Yeah. That's a book I would read.
Yeah, especially in her accent.
Yes. Okay, so Eat That Frog was published originally in 2001. Our book today, No Excuses, was originally published in 2010.
Okay.
So there have been a number of years between now and 2010. A lot of changes in society have happened. A lot of awareness over certain aspects of people's lived experiences. As important as it is to put these books in the content of the time that they were written in order to understand some of the perspectives, we talked also in our preface about the importance of making space or allowing room for the existence of different lived experiences in some of this writing.
Yeah, I think that even 2010, even 2001, there was plenty of talk around these matters. I mean, even today, there's certain portions of society who don't have a need to notice that.
Yeah.
If you don't need to notice it, you probably won't.
on the subject of writing in absolutes as being one of the problems with a lot of personal development writing. There are so many examples of this in this book that in some cases I was just astounded by.
Me too.
Right.
I mean, I think it comes from a good place and maybe just ignorance to how world looks very different to other people. Yeah.
So speaking of the place that it comes from, what do you see as the intention of this book?
I guess it is basically get your shit together, be disciplined, be routined, be healthy, and you'll get everything you want. All of, like, for me, absolutely. Looking after my body, trying to push routine even though I'm very unroutine. Putting the important things first, putting the look... All of that, very good advice. It's what my psychologists have taught me. The way he says it is just like, just do it. Oh, really? Well, I would have never thought of that.
Yeah, I think the intention of books like this is to help people understand the difference between something that is a valid reason for not being able to do something and something that really is just a bullshit excuse.
Yeah.
So if we're giving this guy and writers who write this way the benefit of the doubt, it's like, yeah, we could all benefit from continuously developing our own self-discipline. It's something that I am committed to continuing to develop.
Oh, every day.
Yeah.
It's one of my goals every day.
Yeah.
Last few weeks, doing the dishes every night before bed. It's been beautiful. The amount of positive feelings that's put in my heart, waking up to the clean kitchen to make my breakfast. Amazing.
Yep.
But it takes a hell of a lot. And there's been a couple of days there where I've just been like, it's going to have to wait.
Yeah, you can create as many systems as you want to. You can create the most beautiful vision board. You can create the most seemingly bulletproof action plan. But if you don't have the self-discipline to commit to the actions that you have set out for yourself, whatever plans that you had in place are going to fall apart.
Yep.
Yeah. So
I
self-discipline
can
is
confirm.
tremendously important.
Yeah, I can confirm all of that. I have always been someone who, like with ADHD, immediacy, very easy. Like I could do everything in the moment. But something that is a little more unusual for certain neurodivergent people is I'm a long-term thinker. My 5-year, 10-year plan has always been important, which was really difficult when I couldn't see my future, but I always had to have some sort of like goal, somewhere to head.
Yeah.
Otherwise, how do you decide, how do you make your choices? But those midterm goals, like the self-discipline and the day-to-day and the doing jobs that you have to do every day, I'm terrible at. Deep cleaning, spring cleaning, huge jobs, fine.
Yep.
Because you just like burst of energy, do it right now, immediacy. But yeah, those routine, regular, boring things that just drag on for your entire life, they are just painful.
They're painful even for neurotypical people. But then when people like us who are not neurotypical, it's a whole other kind of adventure.
Yeah.
Okay, so because we're not just here to take down personal development books, we've committed to finding at least one thing we really like about any of the books that we discuss, right?
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about what we like about this book. I'm going to start with the way the book is structured. It's structured in a very simple and straightforward fashion. We've talked about oversimplification being potentially problematic, right? But when it comes to the structure of the book, this is where I love simplicity. It's divided into 3 parts, and then each section has 7 chapters. Part 1, self-discipline and personal success. Part 2, self-discipline in business, sales, and finances. Part 3, self-discipline and the good life. And every single chapter is labeled using the same format. Self-discipline and plus a noun or short noun phrase. So we have chapters like self-discipline and responsibility, self-discipline and time management, self-discipline and marriage. So the way each section is labeled, I find it's very straightforward. It's very to the point.
Yeah.
There are going to be no surprises as to what is supposed to appear in this section.
I've had that problem where they got very flowery, decorative language. You're like, that's cute, but I would like to just know, and I don't have all the time in the world. Let me just go to that section. I don't care about business.
Yeah. So it makes it an easy book to reference from. If you don't want to read the whole thing. Yeah. Even though it's a pretty quick read as far as books go, I think. Also, the language is pretty simple. There aren't too many big flowery words.
No, and that's how you're supposed to write for accessible writing.
Yeah.
And it's something that I've done at work, is where I make writing more accessible for the average person to read, because we're trying to give that information out to everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think this book, for that reason, would also be quite useful for non-native English speakers. I would be concerned with some of the cultural implications of the content, but the structure.
I do think culturally it could actually speak better to certain cultures than ours as well. Because I have friends from certain cultures where that's very much along the lines of get down to business, straightforward, no bullshit.
Yeah, true. What are some things that you like about the book?
I wrote down a couple of the things that I liked. Write it down. Just try to do one thing each day towards your goal.
So this is one of his specific tips, is
to write it down.
Down.
And I find if I have that written down and I see it, like, you sometimes wake up certain mornings and you're just like, I don't even know what I'm doing.
I never have days like that, Mika.
Well,
as a busy mum.
Well, yeah, I think kids kind of would keep you on your toes more.
Yeah.
So that's something that's worked for me quite well, is as long as I can achieve one thing in that day, no matter how unwell I'm feeling or off track I feel, I'm like, look, I can put a tick next to that. I did that. Even if it's something as little as do the dishes before bed, go to bed on time, eat a wholesome meal. Those things, to me, those are goals that I have. They might not seem like those grand 5-year, 10-year, 20-year plans, but those steps on the way lead to that goal.
Yes.
So one example that's worked for me really well is I was getting very depressed and could not function very well at all, trying to think about how I could save the 90 or so K dollars for my transition surgery.
Just stop eating avocado toast.
Yeah.
You can buy a house and get surgery.
Funny you mentioned that. So I thought to myself, I just need to be doing anything to feel like I'm somehow saving money, even though I didn't have much to be able to put away in the bank when I'm paying rent and buying food and paying bills. So I happened to have a friend who was looking at buying a house, and I said, that's a goal of mine as well, because I would like to say, if I can pay instead of paying rent, I'm paying a mortgage, that's money that's going away, basically, that I can access again in the future.
Yeah.
So and then we bought a house together, and I also can renovate, so I was doing renovations because I knew it would add value to the house. And so by doing that each day, even if I could just get up and fix some plasterboard or, paint a wall, that showed me that little step is leading to the big goal, and it just took down those barriers, kind of reduced the depression that was keeping me from moving forward. And just taking those little steps.
Yeah. And I think writing things down, making lists works really well for some people, and for some people it's just no. From a neurodivergent perspective, people's needs vary so widely with that sort of thing.
Yeah, mine generally comes down to don't do it. Oh, catastrophe, everything's a mess. I can't even deal with life. I guess I'm just going to lie in bed and then write down a list because I don't feel like I can do anything else.
For me, Trello is my second brain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I use a mind map as well, where you can, because mine branches too much when I'm using normal lists. And so I'm like, yeah, this dot point needs these dot points, that needs those, that leads back over to this one. So using the mind map where you can make arrows that lead right around the thoughts are really good.
Another thing I like about this book is that it speaks to my stubbornness when there's something I really want to get done, and I'm just like, no, we're doing this.
Yeah.
No excuses. I've had to measure my intensity of that in some situations, because I don't like when my expectations of myself spill over onto my expectations of other people. That's where things can get pretty sticky.
I wouldn't know anything about that. Yeah, I'm always having to pull myself back and remind myself that everyone else's choices are theirs, my choices are mine, and if my choices are affecting other people's lives, I shouldn't expect them to accept that. I'm all for personal freedoms and doing what you want, so long as it doesn't affect other people in a negative way.
And finding how those things impact people is often a more challenging discussion than a lot of people are willing to have or have the time to have.
Yeah. Yep.
Anyway, when I think of excuses, I think back to my days as a university teacher dealing with my students and the kinds of excuses that I would hear all the time. One of the most frequent frustrating excuses I would get for students, for example, not coming to class or coming really late was, it was raining.
Wow. Okay.
And I don't understand how people can be so averse to rain, especially when they lived on campus. Umbrellas aren't that expensive. And my whole stance on using rain as an excuse has always been, if you are not made of sugar, you can get wet and not die.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. Or I would get excuses like, this was something that I would hear from my students, but something that really bothers me in my personal relationships as well is, I'm too hungover.
What?
I'm too hungover to show up to honor the commitment that I made to being where I was supposed to be. And it's like,
Wow.
You had a choice to not drink loads of alcohol the night before an important event,
Yeah.
right?
It's particularly one where self-inflicted situations are not good excuses.
Exactly.
If there's such thing as a good excuse.
Exactly. If something is important enough to you to be not hungover the next day, you will actively choose not to drink in excess.
Yeah. I think that's a really key point too. The importance to someone.
Yeah.
Because in personal situations, I feel like that comes up a lot too.
Yeah.
Where they'll use an excuse to cancel plans, and it happens on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And it's even more like, I feel like I'm not a priority, and I get that some people are struggling and they have things they're trying to work through. But when I also struggle with the same things and I still make the effort and I still will drag myself out by the ear, even though I don't feel like doing it at the time, I know it's the right thing to do and that I'll enjoy myself if I actually make that commitment.
Yeah.
So I think you have to be really honest with yourself whether those excuses are the reason or whether it's an underlying thing that you are too emotionally like stunted, or you're emotionally like avoiding addressing.
Yeah. And some excuses have, in some cases, the stakes are lower than others with the excuses. When it comes to the broader social issues, excuses that I am just so tired of hearing for things like, it's when people will try to validate their own bigotry
Whoa.
by saying things like, "Oh, I'm old school," or that's just how I was raised.
Wow.
It's such a cop-out. It's
Yeah.
like, sorry, you have to take ownership of whatever opinions and ideas you have. Don't blame your mama, your grandmother, your great-great-great-great-grandpappy. It's like, this is you. This is on you.
Yeah, that's very much in the vein of the perpetuating abuse cycle and the, I guess, perpetuating ignorance as well.
Yeah. So what are some excuses you're tired of?
Well, I've already mentioned that kind of using excuses to get out of social situations, which you need to consider how that will make the other person feel if it's becoming a pattern. Like,
Yeah.
it's fine for it to happen occasionally.
What's the excuse?
I feel too sick.
Okay.
I feel too sick to do this today, but you feel sick every day. I feel sick every day. Does that mean we're never going to catch up? So it's kind of one of those things.
It's like, let's be sick together.
Yeah. I'm like, we can make a alternative plan. We can do something else. Like, don't make it an excuse to just like completely cancel. Let's find a solution.
Yeah.
And I guess the other thing that drives me mad is excuses where it's about what they don't have control of in the situation. So, like, the external locus of control versus internal. They're focusing on the wrong part of the problem. I've had this situation myself. You get to points in life where you just feel so out of control, you don't know where to go. But that's when asking for help is important. Not asking for pity. Because so often it feels like someone's just coming to you wanting to moan and for you to pat their back and say, "Oh, poor baby." And I don't do that.
Yeah, me either.
Don't come to me. I mean, I'll try, but I'm not very good at it. But that is the moment when you feel like there's nothing you can do. You go to someone and you say, "How can I change? How can this change? How can this situation change?" And that's when help is worth something. Like, I can point you in the right direction. You can go to a life coach that can point you in the right direction. But that is like a tool to find the way to you being able to advocate for yourself.
Yep.
Putting on your ass-kicking boots. Like, that's what you're trying to get to.
Yeah.
And once you get there, you start knocking on doors. It doesn't matter how many are locked, because so many doors are locked when you're looking for a way out. And you got your boots on, start kicking down doors.
Yep.
And, like, I've done that myself, but I didn't get there immediately. It took a long time, probably a decade of work, because I came from some dark places. But you do it because no one else is going to make that change in your life. If you keep focusing on the external stuff you have no control over, nothing's going to change.
Yep. Like, that change has to be driven by something within.
Yeah, and I think it's important too, as the person receiving those excuses, to think about, am I going to enable this, like, feeling of helplessness?
Yep.
Or am I going to give a bit of tough love? Sometimes it's really hard, and you look like the bad guy in their eyes and sometimes other people's eyes if you're not willing to just accept those excuses.
Yeah.
But there's a really important balance there.
Yeah.
And then you also have to assess, is this person, do they want to change? Do they believe they can change? And if they don't, move on. It's a black hole where your energy is going to go nowhere.
Yeah. And that can be a matter of self-preservation as well.
Absolutely.
It's like, people need to take ownership of the excuses they're making. Yeah. Are these things valid obstacles that you need to find strategies around? Or are you just shirking responsibility? And yes, some of these things do require systemic changes.
They do.
But even within that, recognizing that and finding your path through that challenging system is a conscious decision you have to make.
Exactly.
And if you are in a position where you are privileged enough to engage in that fight, to change the systems, to make things more accessible for people who don't have your same level of privilege, then that's worth doing.
It is. And even if it feels like a bit, like a little drop in the bucket, it can make you feel like you are working forwards towards your values, towards the change you want to see. Even if you don't see the big changes, it's amazing how much little things do change in the long run.
It's a service to humanity.
Yeah. And a service to yourself, really.
Yes. So I'm going to read you just a little piece of the book because it really sets the stage for me for the overarching flaw in this book.
Yeah.
All right. Or this is on page 24 in a section labeled Starting with Nothing. Interestingly, almost everyone starts out the same in life with
Sorry.
already, right?
Yep.
With little or nothing. Almost all fortunes in America and worldwide are first generation. This means that most What's the face, Mika?
Nothing. I let you finish.
Okay. This means that most individuals started with little or nothing and earned everything they own in their current lifetime. Okay. What an interesting quote-unquote fact. Next section. The wealthiest people in America are almost all first-generation multi-billionaires. This is the case with wealthy Americans such as Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, Larry Ellison, Michael Dell, and Paul Allen. Fully 80% of millionaires and multimillionaires started with little money, often penniless, and sometimes deeply in debt and with few advantages, such as Sam Walton, who died worth more than $100 billion. Why have these people been able to achieve so much when so many have achieved so little? So, he brings up some famous names. He talks about some very successful people in here.
Were there any non-cishet white guys? Or any non-cishets?
No. But you know what else there wasn't any of? Citations.
Yeah. Well, I was waiting to see if that was going to come up.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, I haven't seen research anywhere that shows that everyone just like starts at the same place. In fact, I've seen a lot of data the opposite.
Yeah. And I know you're a big data head. This is one reason I like you.
Gonna find something for the show notes.
But it's really that first 3 sentences that just beg for a citation. When it says almost all fortunes in America are first generation. Based on what?
Yeah.
He's presenting so much information as irrefutable fact and not a single proper citation in this whole book. In this, let's see how many pages are in here. Okay. 293 pages. He makes references to a lot of different people, 77 different people, with not a single footnote, not a single citation, not a single... There's no bibliography. There's no index. Even some of the people that he quotes or some of the historical occurrences that he mentions, he doesn't back them up with anything that you can then find more information about. And for someone who allegedly has written, 755 books or whatever it is, and thousands of articles, I feel there is no excuse for that.
I have come across this in, let's say, more privileged crowds where I'm speaking and I'm kind of going, and it comes from this paper here, and they're like, why do you feel the need to always say prove what you're saying?
Yep.
We believe you. I'm like, growing up as a woman, if you're a professional, you have to come in guns blazing with all your receipts for everything you say.
Yep.
People do not believe you. And that's something I've noticed when I transitioned is people just suddenly started taking my word for things I said, even when I was bullshitting, stumbling through. And I thought to myself suddenly, Oh my God, that's why I always thought my dad and my brother knew everything. Is it just really confidently said everything?
There are so many places in this book where I feel not having citations is just irresponsible.
Literally dangerous in certain places.
Yeah. For example, he brings up all of these different laws. Most people are very familiar with things like the law of attraction and the so-called 12 universal laws. There are all these other whole sets of laws, the origins of which are not scrutinized nearly enough.
Or that it's only a theory within many.
Yeah, but he presents them as unshakable, written in stone rules about the universe.
Yeah.
So it talks about things like the law of substitution. He mentions that in the context of taking responsibility for everything negative that happens in your life. On page 58, he says, it is not possible to accept responsibility and remain angry at the same time. It is not possible to accept responsibility and experience negative emotion. It is not possible to accept responsibility without being calm, clear, positive, and focused once more. Like, where are the studies that show that claiming responsibility is the key to then becoming more calm, clear, positive, and focused? I think anyone who has, for example, grown up with a parent who has, like, martyr-like tendencies,
Yeah.
can attest to the fact that simply taking responsibility for everything is not the key to happiness.
In fact, it would be a very dark hole to go down if you took personal responsibility for every bad thing that happened to you. For instance, having been in an abusive relationship.
Yeah.
Like, that is a very dangerous direction to go.
Yeah. This is a way people manipulate people. This is something that is used by cults and by narcissistic leaders to say, well, you know, if you take personal responsibility for everything that happens to you, then nothing can actually hurt you. Okay? That's where the difference between personal responsibility and extreme personal responsibility matters, in my mind.
Yes. Yeah.
Because, again, no one's going to come save you, but if you voluntarily take on the weight of everything, it absolves certain entities of the responsibility of not being a dick.
Yeah. And I have to say, I have tried this method for a lot of my life. And it was actually the turnaround point when I gave myself permission to just be sad and accept that certain things have been done to me or just systematically are problematic. And yeah, that change in attitude to it's not fair and it's happened to you and that's why things are hard. So now I have the knowledge to find the right tools to move forward.
Yeah, but we can't ignore a lot of the sources of these challenging emotions.
Yeah. It's
They go like, oh, don't worry about it. That's in the past. Just think about the future. It's like, well, then I won't know what to grab from my armory if I don't have the context to know what to take into battle next time.
Yeah. Well, the bottle capping is basically what he uses in all of this. He just bottle caps everything, sticks it back into the cellar. Because, what? Abuse? I didn't have abuse. Bottle cap.
Oh, but if you're following the laws of the universe and everything, if you're being abused, you're attracting that abuse.
Oh, yeah, of course.
There's something that you've done that keeps bringing this abuse into your life. But we're not accusing Brian Tracy of being an abuser.
No. I was thinking
Just
more, we don't know much about his past, but his actions do remind me of certain people who
Yeah.
have put that away.
Yeah, it's more the fact that this collection of laws that he's presenting are being touted as facts.
These sort of books, that's how you sell them. If you're like, oh, I guess kind of wishy-washy, you can try this, you can try that, no publisher's going to want to take you on. They'll just be like, well, you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, but for someone who has allegedly written 237 books and published thousands of articles, you think he would know better.
Well, he's his own citation.
Right. It's like, because I said so.
Yeah.
But speaking of citations and the need for them, when he's presenting things related to science, health, and I know that you, Mika, as someone who has spoken very openly about your experience with disordered eating, that you have concerns with the way he presents some of this information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do actually have a lot to say about chapter 16, self-discipline and personal health. He goes a lot into diet and exercise. Let me start with saying that I really think that eating well and having enough physical activity will be very beneficial to your life and makes a lot of difference. And he does start in a good place. Like, his first sections are just eat normally, you know, don't do extreme diets, you know, don't smoke, drink in moderation.
Yep.
Great stuff. From his perspective, perfect to say. And then he goes on to start talking about weight. You'll look good, feel good, and generally feel more positive and in control of your life. We're getting into a shallow place here.
Yeah.
We're starting to get into dangerous territory, because this is where the difference between like fat stigma and not paying attention to how mental health is so important in all of this. And mental health is the starting point, not weight. And that's a mistake so many people make, is hitting this, I want to be a certain way or look a certain way, when they should be thinking, I want to be whole in myself. I want to feel well in myself in all aspects.
Yeah.
And that doesn't come from just physical health.
And if he's going to say things like that, he needs to provide citations.
Particularly when he gets to his bits about the actual diets. He goes into actually saying, like, you just lose weight by eating less and exercising more. Okay, where did you find that out? Because bodies are actually very complicated. And he does even mention people have different metabolisms and different bodies, you know, like, you have to understand that things are different. And then he goes and just says, oh, it's simple, and just like, don't eat sugar and flour and salt. And I'm kind of like, all right, well, please tell me your research to how you think this is the right way to diet, and also how dangerous it is to give in such certain terms these sort of things. Someone might read this and go, oh, cool, follow it, don't get the results they want. And that, like, each of these failures, he's just playing into that diet culture, even though he starts with saying these extreme diet cultures are BS.
Yep.
And then goes on to just give a really certain, like, oh, if you just get rid of sugar and white flour products, everything will be fine.
And he's a sales guy. He's not a nutritionist or a dietitian.
He has no business getting into that stuff. Where he said some of this thing, perfect. You know, just be sensible. And then he could say, you might want to discuss it with professionals. See an exercise physiologist to make sure you're not, like, jumping into exercise that's going to injure you and make things worse. Make those little failures just pile up. Every time you go in too hard, extreme diet, extreme exercise, and fall backwards again, mentally the damage that does is worse than if you had just stayed where you were. I think it's better to hold back and do things right. And I think that comes to my point of this whole book. Moderation is hard, extremes are easy. And that's what it feels like to me. It's kind of like, oh, just work hard, just throw yourself in one direction. It reminds me of 1950s husbands, you know, work all day, come home, barely see the family, go to bed, go back to work. And he seems to understand that moderation is right and then misses the point. It's like he knows what he should do and then doesn't do it. To tell you the truth, you couldn't pay me his entire wealth to have his life. I think I would actually be rather miserable because this doesn't align with my values.
The other thing is, there are so many chunks of this book that are like one recycled sales pitch after another. If you invest this percentage of your wealth back into yourself, into your education, into your professional development, you will gain such and such a number. And then comes up with, it's like he's created these formulas for, you spend this much, you will gain this much. You spend more, you will gain more. Okay, let's not ignore the fact that Brian Tracy makes his money selling books, courses, seminars, and speaking on success. It's like these little reminders.
It's
of
like a
him going,
pyramid scheme. We can't all do that.
Yeah.
Like,
it's this constant reminder of like, buy my stuff. By the way, buy my stuff.
yeah.
Buy my stuff, please.
And so that was actually one of the points I had picked out as well. His savings plan, I guess when you have a sudden accident and you end up in the hospital with $500,000 bill, the hospital would just be like, oh yeah, but you were saving that. You keep that and we'll just wait.
Yeah.
Yesterday I was just reading a story of someone who was just minding their own business. Someone walked up to them in America.
Yeah.
Walked up to them, just stabbed them to steal their wallet, and 15 years later, still paying off the hospital bill.
Yep.
And, I mean, we don't have the same problems of emergency medicine costing a fortune here.
But that person needs to take responsibility for the fact that they got stabbed.
I mean,
like, they shouldn't have attracted that knife into
have
their
walked outside.
gallbladder.
Yeah, how dare you walk outside?
Yeah, they should be inside grinding.
Yeah.
They should be working.
Yes.
And not socializing, not having coffee, just working.
Yeah. Like, enjoyment is clearly a slippery slope to poverty and sadness.
And being a loser.
Yeah.
Being one of the failures.
Yeah. Just don't eat sugar. Don't go outside. Don't
have friends.
Yeah, like, just work hard. Take everything that happens to you is your own fault.
Yeah.
Just be miserable to be happy.
And never, ever spend any time with a member of the quote-unquote opposite sex if you're in a relationship.
Oh.
Did you get to that part?
Did I miss that? I think I probably skimmed over it because I was so disturbed by the headings of like the gender stuff, and I started spiraling down my thoughts. But no, I didn't read that little treasure trove.
This is one place where I feel he undercuts his message of self-discipline and personal responsibility.
Yeah.
So in part 3, which is self-discipline and the good life, or the chapter on self-discipline and marriage, I'll read this bit to you. Now, where is it? Oh, okay. Here we go. This is in a section titled Total Commitment is Essential. All right. One of the most important disciplines in a marriage or relationship is that of faithfulness. Okay, fine, whatever.
If that's you're monogamous and whatnot, sure.
Yeah. But even like faithfulness, if you have certain agreements and you're adhering to those agreements, that's important.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah.
Because we live in a highly sexualized society, there are temptations and provocations around us all the time and virtually everywhere we go. It often takes considerable self-discipline and self-control to be completely loyal to your spouse throughout your married life. Okay.
Has that been a struggle for you? I know. For me, not really.
No.
When I make an agreement with someone, I keep my word.
Yeah. But see, he talks about how it takes considerable self-discipline, but then this is how he illustrates this self-discipline, or not. There are 2 ways to help you avoid the regular temptations that can damage or even destroy the most loving of relationships. Here it is. First, make a decision in advance that you will never, never be unfaithful to your spouse. Okay.
Fair.
Yeah, like drawing a line in the sand, make the decision in advance that no matter what happens, you will not stray for any reason. Cool.
And discuss it with your spouse.
Yeah. Second, discipline yourself to stay out of harm's way. Refuse to go anywhere or do anything where temptation may exist. Except when essential for business purposes, avoid having lunch, drinks, or dinner alone with a member of the opposite sex.
Wow. He just red-pilled all the way.
I don't know. How do you feel when you're out having dinner with a member of the opposite sex, Mika?
Depends if they're my friend or my partner. And also if that is your sexual preference. Because what do you do if you're gay? Do you just not do business? Or do you use self-discipline?
Well, in the world of this No Excuses book, there are no gay people.
Yeah, I kind of noticed.
I'm not saying that because he doesn't explicitly mention homosexual relationships. he leaves no room whatsoever for the possibility of homosexual relationships to exist.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to go through and reread this whole book into the microphone in order to drive that point home. But I think that paragraph illustrates one way in which writers can do this. Writing in absolutes about a very gender normative, very heteronormative context as if it is a universal truth.
I also think it shows a real truth about how he views women. That a woman is always a sexual object.
Yep. What I find so funny is the idea that lunch, drinks, or dinner is going to lead to sex.
Yeah. Or like automatically be a temptation as well.
It's like, let's imagine that you're Brian Tracy or whoever, you're having dinner with a beautiful woman and you're just foaming at the mouth with excitement over how she looks and blah, 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 blah. Does the woman have any agency in this interaction?
Oh, but you don't understand, Leslie. He is just such an irresistible man.
Oh, yeah.
Like, clearly, every woman would just be scrambling over each other to get to him. So he's the one who has to have all the self-control.
Yeah. However one may think about his personal appearance, I really don't have a strong opinion.
I have no idea what it looks like. But, I mean, there isn't one universally attractive type of person. Except perhaps Ryan Reynolds. I mean, call me bae.
Yeah. You know, I asked myself not too long ago who I would choose, given the choice between Ryan Reynolds and Ryan Gosling. And through this back and forth, came to the dark realization that it didn't fucking matter, because neither one of them wants me. Okay. This whole idea of avoiding temptation to stray, that's fair enough. I don't see a huge problem in that. But we're talking about lunch, drinks, or dinner. If you were writing things like, don't go into a hotel room with someone you find attractive, maybe.
Don't snuggle up on the couch under the same blanket with someone you find attractive.
Don't exchange platonic boob massages. Yeah, I feel putting people in slightly more risque situations makes a lot more sense as an illustration of temptation.
Yeah,
something that might lead to sex. But it's like, isn't this whole book about self-discipline?
Yeah.
Like, where do we draw the line when it comes to self-discipline? Like, don't go to lunch with someone. It's like, just don't have sex with them. Or don't try to have sex with them. One other area where the lack of citations reveals a fatal flaw in perhaps Brian Tracy's research literacy is on page 55. There's this section labeled An Attitude of Irresponsibility in the chapter about self-discipline and responsibility. And I'll read this bit to you. Our courts today are clogged with thousands of people demanding redress and payment for something that went wrong in their lives. Okay. Backed up by ambitious plaintiff lawyers, people go to court demanding compensation even if they themselves are completely at fault for what happened, especially if they are at fault. Now, I have to note here that the word especially is in bold and in italics, okay, which makes this next part that much more infuriating. People don't want to accept responsibility. People spill hot coffee on themselves and sue the fast food restaurant. Do you know what I'm getting at? That sold them the coffee in the first place.
Yeah.
And then continues the paragraph with some other anecdotes. Now, you reacted to that. I'm curious, is it the same reason I reacted to it?
Because that poor woman has been given so much crap.
Yeah.
Even though I've worked for big corporations where you report over and over, like, this thing's an issue. I'm sure, I believe in that case, there was records that they knew their coffee was being kept too hot.
Yes, this is a reference to the Stella Liebig case.
Yeah.
She received third-degree burns from a cup of coffee that was way too hot. She was not driving while she was drinking this coffee. She wasn't even in the driver's seat. And they were parked. This is a famously debunked accusation that she did it herself and she was just being overly litigious.
Yeah.
And this case was from 1994. Stella Liebig died in 2004.
Wow.
And this book was written in 2010.
Okay.
I'm like, has this guy been living under a rock? This guy who supposedly has written 397 books and written thousands of articles and is this genius who speaks like 17 languages or something. It's like, this is so easy to fact check.
I mean, it would be very easy to write a book or a dissertation or a thesis if you just wrote from your memory, just wrote what you were thinking. Because then it's just a stream of consciousness.
Yeah.
And often it feels a bit like that. Stream of consciousness without stopping and checking that what you're saying is correct.
Yeah. Because to take it as far as to use that very famous case
Very specific.
as an example of people just not taking responsibility, it discredits the entire book. It doesn't mean every single thing is invalid. It means I can't trust this guy.
Yeah.
I can't trust that he's coming from an honest, well-researched place and he knows what he's talking about.
I mean, even if he's being careless, your carelessness can cause harm.
Yeah.
And I wonder if he would take extreme responsibility if someone followed everything he said and became sick or injured because of it. Because he told someone in very specific terms, do this thing. Eat these foods. Do this exercise. Okay, those things could lead to serious harm. Is there any responsibility that should be taken on that? Or does he think all responsibility is personal? If you listen to someone and follow their advice, now your responsibility. Learning to who you can trust is very difficult. I mean, that's a big problem with like this mass communication world we live in. Working out who you can listen to and who you can trust and who advice to take is incredibly difficult. And most people are still stumbling through that. I mean, it's kind of the whole point of this podcast.
Yeah. So the bottom line for me is I don't trust Brian Tracy, even if there is a lot of validity in some of the things that he says. Even if he's right about 90% of things, there's enough in here for me to go, yeah, this is not my guy.
90's being generous.
Well,
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
is the word there. It's like there are some fatal flaws, and that's one of them.
Yeah.
Another reason he's not my guy is because of the picture that he paints, the worldview that he presents based on who he upholds in this book as people who are successful, superior. And he uses very specific language. He talks about winners versus losers. He talks about successes versus failures. He uses the expressions many times, superior people versus failures.
Yep.
And this is something I talked about in a video a couple of years ago. He mentioned 77 different people in this book.
Yep.
If you had to guess how many of those people were women, what would your guess be?
I don't remember a woman being... Oh, except for, like, being sexy people not to hang out with.
I'll tell you who he mentions, right? Helen Keller.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Eleanor Roosevelt.
Also a good example.
Miss Manners.
I don't know who that is.
Well, note that it's not actually her real name. It's her pen name. Her real name is Judith Martin. Okay?
But he couldn't be bothered finding out her real name.
Yeah. He mentions his daughter, Christina. He mentions his wife, but not by name. He mentioned...
My wife.
He mentions that woman that appeared to be such and such person's assistant. And Bridget Jones.
Bridget Jones, that famous...
That famous business mogul, successful entrepreneur, academic.
Yeah, in the real world.
Yeah, and she totally exists too. That's my favorite thing about Bridget Jones. She's a real person, not a fictional character at all.
Whose most character thing is being obsessed about men.
Yeah, yeah. And people of color. If you had to guess, out of those 77 people, how many were people of color?
I mean, I didn't know a lot of their names and couldn't be bothered.
Okay, well, I did.
Okay.
I looked at each of those 77 people. 3 people of color. Yeah. fun facts as well.
I guess that just means they don't have quality of character
to
be winners.
But
they're just all losers because they don't care.
One of those people was Buddha.
What?
Okay. Another one of these people of color was Francis Fukuyama. So he was a Japanese-American economist, political scientist, scholar, who was also a huge defender of the Iraq War. And so he was a big contributor to the Reagan administration. Basically, very, very conservative views, right?
Yep.
Other person of color, a Sufi scholar by the name of Israt Khan, who I still, to this day, have not found any evidence of outside of this book.
Oh.
I know.
Interesting.
I was like, what? Like, does this person exist? And I would like to know if anyone knows who this person is. I am genuinely very curious as to what sort of background information is there. He does make reference to Native American culture, but of course, as you can imagine, he does it all wrong. On page 136, in a section titled The Success Formula, he begins a paragraph saying, "When I began my career working for a large company, I was the low man on the totem pole." That's not how totem poles work. This is a classic, very common misappropriation of Native American culture, okay? So people need to stop saying, low man on the totem pole.
Yes.
And in another part of the book, he uses a Native American fable, quite likely a Cherokee fable, about two wolves to illustrate one of his points, right? He doesn't attribute it to the Cherokee Nation. He doesn't attribute it to Native American culture. He says it's an Indian story. So that just tells you a little bit about Brian Tracy's social awareness. I'm pretty sure that the mid-2000s, late 2000s, by then, there was a much clearer understanding that you don't say Indians when you're referring to Native American people. Again, someone who's supposedly well-researched and prolific as a writer should know better. There are no excuses for that kind of oversight.
Yep.
But the reason this matters, as much as people like to cry, oh, no, like, you're preaching wokeness, blah, blah, blah. It's like, no. The reason this matters is because this guy has painted a very clear picture that erases the contributions of people who do not fit into one very particular ethnic, cultural lens. There are some people in the book that he mentions a number of times, but among this collection of superior people and winners, mentions people like George Washington, slave owner.
And super cliche.
Mentions people like Napoleon Hill several times. For those who don't know, the writer of Think and Grow Rich.
Oh.
Also, very arguably one of the biggest con men to ever exist. There's a lot of very strong evidence to suggest that Think and Grow Rich was just BS.
I did notice some of the people he mentioned are famously known for getting rich via unethical means.
Yeah.
And that I kind of, even though he talks about values and instilling good values in your children, this sort of thing.
Yeah. When you're citing, well, not citing because there aren't any citations, but people who are oil tycoons and people who have gained their billions through very verifiable exploitation of other people, of the environment. Like, what is that saying? What is his message about success?
Well, that's the very integral part of this book, getting rich.
Yeah.
And he very much glosses over all the other types of success and important contributions to society that people make.
Yeah.
Particularly with minorities and marginalized people.
Yeah. Yeah. It just don't have any value in society.
Not to mention women being left with the role of a lot of the time in many parts of our cultures of doing everything else that's not financial gain.
Oh yes, like the great thinker of our time, Bridget Jones. Like, she needs more credit. I want to read Bridget Jones's autobiography with a foreword by Brian Tracy.
I hear she named it her diary.
Oh, but she's one of those people that Brian Tracy's not allowed to go to dinner with or have lunch with.
Oh, yeah. So he probably didn't get to know her very well.
Down.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a shame. So, Mika, as we start to bring this conversation to a close, what is your overall assessment of this book?
Well, the thing is, he has some good advice. A lot of places he starts are like professionally backed or evidence-based theories, facts even. But then he goes off into his own opinions, his own thoughts on the subject, which is fine, but he doesn't differentiate. You don't know where the evidence stops and where his version starts.
Yep.
There's no problem with giving your version of things. He just doesn't let you know.
Yeah.
And people are looking for answers, and they might try his way and it doesn't work for them, so they think that theory doesn't work for them. However, by like qualified psychologist or other professional, that theory is a very useful tool. And it would be really like a waste for people to miss that opportunity.
Yeah.
He also values financial gain. Like, that's his version of success. If you don't have financial gain, you're not successful. The way he says it, you're a loser if you don't succeed, if you don't make money. No, I have a different value to you. To me, helping others and making others' lives richer emotionally, socially, in so many other ways that makes, to me, quality of life much better. That's, to me, a value. That's me winning. He even mentions somewhere, like, you have a weakness of character if you fail. Like, failure is a choice. Failure is all your fault.
Yeah. Although he does contradict his points in some ways.
Oh,
like
many times.
Well, I'll give you an example. In chapter 15, page 213, and I mean, he doesn't even do it well. This is the thing. Self-discipline and happiness. This is the beginning of the chapter. Your ability to achieve your own happiness is the true measure of your success in life. Okay. Nothing is more important. Nothing can replace it. If you accomplish everything of a material nature, but you are not happy, you have actually failed at fulfilling your potential as a human being. Now, it's like he's taking that financial and monetary success message and then just crapping on it with toxic positivity about happiness.
Yeah.
It's like...
He doesn't seem to value the fact that there are a lot of people that choose jobs that are going to earn them less money because it fulfills a part of society. I think of social workers immediately. If you become a social worker, you consciously know you are signing up for never having a great pay.
Yeah.
But you do it because it's like worthy. It's a worthy thing to do.
And yeah, he sends a very muddled message about success and happiness balance, because in the areas where he's writing about work and workplace culture, it's very much, and this is barely even a paraphrase. It's when you're at work. Get there early, leave late, work a lot more hours than you're being paid for. That message, stated in a number of different ways throughout the book, do more work than you're being paid for.
Does he work for middle management?
That is the key to ascending through the career ladder and to making more money. It's as if he assumes this benevolence of the people in management for whatever organization you're working for. They're just going to be so grateful and notice how much you're taking on all this responsibility. And they're like, you know what? We're going to promote you.
Yeah, there's a promotion for everyone.
Yeah, which is just not valid in today's culture of an increasingly casualized workforce, especially here in Australia. It's one of the reasons I left my university job. Because there was just...
Yes.
There was a ceiling. and it was
And he
almost inescapable.
And it could be that his personal experience, he didn't see the ceiling as much because he is from one of the groups. He is from one of the groups that is more likely to be able to break through the ceiling.
Yeah. And it's just stated so oversimplistically.
Mm-hmm. So, Leslie,
Uh-huh.
if you had to bring a few points out about this book, like sum it all up for me.
Okay. Well, it's not a useless book.
I could agree.
And I would never tell people, don't waste your time reading this book. I don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
And the truth is, there are some very useful, practical tips that people can put into action immediately, which is one of the reasons the book is still sitting on my shelf in my office. It's easy to reference. It very succinctly packages some ideas in a way that can be easily absorbed. But, and this is a big but, and if anyone knows about big buts, it's me. It's us.
I think I could take you on.
I'm going to call this Leslie's Big Butt.
Ooh.
Okay.
New section.
A whole new podcast.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with this book is that it exemplifies an ongoing problem in personal development culture as a whole, where the hustle is all that matters.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And where toxic positivity still prevails. Because if you're not happy, which is an integral part of success, then you are a failure. So you can't have negative thoughts. And if you have a negative thought, you can just substitute it with a positive thought, because it's impossible then to be sad. And where systemic blocks that make some people's path to success harder just don't exist. Because everything is a matter of personal choice. And this is not the world we live in. It's not the world we lived in 2010 when the book was published. So I guess it was written like the year or two before then. And that's not the world that a lot of people have lived in, like, ever. People from various marginalized communities, even people from quote-unquote mainstream communities. If you really look at the genuine struggles that people go through, it's like you can't just click your fingers and go, I'm just not going to make any excuses, and that's going to be the key to my everlasting happiness. There is something to be said for taking on a no excuses attitude in a lot of contexts in your life. I very much exemplify that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with a lot of it. Yeah.
But it's pummeling us with this message that just does not seem in touch with reality. And there are no citations. There are no citations.
And the people that it misses are the most vulnerable people.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Like, if someone's already at the point that they can accept this advice, they're so much further ahead than a load of people who are struggling and not succeeding.
Yeah. So I would not recommend this as like a casual Christmas read to someone who is very, very like in the depths of the deepest depression and they feel like there's no way out.
Yeah. If you feel like you're just like your life is a complete shambles and you just can't understand why things are happening.
Yeah.
Just not making excuses probably isn't the starting point.
Yeah, nah. All right, Mika.
Yes.
What is your conclusion on the subject of making excuses?
We don't all start in the same place. There will be barriers in front of you, and for some, it might look like a fortress within a maze just to reach your goals. The important things to remember are it's okay to be where you are right now and to feel overwhelmed. Believing that there is a way through those barriers is the first step in moving forward. Knowing that you should move slow and steady, and it's not your job to break down those walls while you're on the outside of the fortress. You will burn out before you've even started. You will do more towards breaking that wall by finding the cesspit, climbing up through the shitter, and throwing down a rope to your peers. Together with a critical mass of marginalized people who have found entry to the Forbidden Fortress, we can push that wall down from the weak side. The excuse you shouldn't be making is that there is no hole in the wall or rope hanging down, and that one day you will build the strength to be able to scale and eventually raise that wall to the ground.
And that was beautifully stated. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. So what about you? Like, what's your summary?
All right. I'll read what I've written.
Great.
Okay. So this is my conclusion. Making excuses can provide us with comfort, but staying comfortable can be a barrier to our personal growth. And when we as a human collective can recognize the systemic issues that make some people's journeys disproportionately harder and use whatever privileges we may have to help address those issues, that's what will allow us to support healthier communities. When you see a barrier in front of you, it's important to understand whether those barriers are real or whether they're just your perception. And where real barriers exist, we need to take ownership of our decision whether to accept that we'll never surmount that obstacle and do nothing as a result, or whether we'll commit to kicking down the doors to give ourselves the best fighting chance of living lives that are meaningful and fulfilling. And in cases where we do have the privilege of relieving the burden of our comrades who are in a seemingly constant state of fighting these systems, it's worth considering what we can do to create spaces where we can provide shelter from those storms every now and then.
Oh, wonderful. I love that as well. I think we're on a very similar route, but from like slightly different visualizations, mental visualizations of the problem.
I hope so. It'd be weird if we just were on completely different wavelengths about this topic altogether. It's like, actually, I really like this Brian Tracy guy, and everything he has to say is exactly perfect.
So, Leslie,
yes?
If people want to find us online, where should they look?
They should go to my Instagram, which is leslievcoaching, Leslie with an IE, and you can send us a message. You can recommend some books that you want us to discuss. Ooh, that would be super helpful.
That'd be fun.
Yeah, and if you're keen, you can also book a free life coaching consultation in person or online.
Great. And don't forget to check the show notes if you want any extra resources or information about anything we discussed today.
Yep, for sure. So with that, I think we can close with a quote. What do you say?
Sounds great.
Excellent. So this one comes from a different George Washington.
There's a different George Washington?
Yeah, a different George Washington from the one that Brian Tracy talked about. This one's George Washington Carver.
Oh, right.
Yeah, that guy.
Yeah.
The peanut guy.
Yeah.
So George Washington Carver was a Black American scientist who is most well known for his innovations relating to agriculture, working with peanuts, sweet potatoes, sustainable farming, creating systems and practices that still have implications for how sustainability and farming are handled today.
Fed the world.
Yeah. And he was born into slavery. So even going through the process of getting educated, he faced a lot of barriers. Through the process of getting a tertiary education, faced tremendous barriers, obstacle after obstacle after obstacle, and just persisted, did not give up. That said, these barriers should not have existed in the first place, because naturally stories like that of George Washington Carver and other Black scientists and people of his ilk from that time were exceptions.
Yep.
There was so much other talent just trapped within these systems that didn't cut through, which is a shame. But anyway, my closing quote from George Washington Carver. It's a short and simple one, straight to the point. 99% of the failures come from people who have the habit of making excuses. Boom.
Yep. That's very much in the vein of what we've been talking about today.
Yes.
It's not a new thing.
No. All right. Thanks again, Mika, for chatting with me.
Had
Always
a great
good.
time.
It's always a great time, isn't it?
So much fun.
And to our listeners, we'll see you again in Chapter 2.